Elisa, I am going to hand the mic to you for you to give a proper intro of yourself here. But the core idea here is just to get everybody equipped with some lightweight editing skills that they can use to give great feedback and edits and contributions to other people's work and to self-edit their own stuff. It's most of the folks in Compound consider themselves to be writers, not really editors. So the whole idea here is let's give everybody some just lightweight editing skills that'll get half of the way there to really getting a professional level refinement of your work. Elisa, I'm going to hand the mic to you and let's rock and roll.
Awesome. So what I'm going to talk to you guys today about is the editor's creed. And this is something that I created for everyone who works at my agency. As Stu mentioned, I am an editor. I am a writer first and foremost, which is what we'll talk about in just a second. But basically, I created this creed that everyone who works within my agency reads when they come on board and adheres to. It's like our code of conduct, as Stu is joking, our Hippocratic oath of how we will treat writers writing when we're going through it. I don't know that we have much housekeeping, but I'm a huge meme fan, so there will be a number of them throughout the presentation. Sorry, not sorry. But I don't think we have any housekeeping. So I am going to tell you instead, who am I and why anyone would want to listen to me. That is a debate for the ages. But in terms of this particular broadcast, I'm a writer, editor, content strategist, and writing coach, all the fun buzzwords of any sort of content marketing or creative endeavor. I started as a writer. That's the most important thing for anyone who's listening to understand. I actually started writing kind of my own personal blog. I quickly got picked up for syndication regionally. And then someone started paying me to write bar guide reviews for the largest paper in Maine, which was like the best gig ever. And then my career took off from there. I've written for publications like the New York Times, the Boston Globe. I used to have a syndicated column on Forbes. I was headhunted as one of their first contributors. So I've been writing for a long while. Writing's where I started. And then what happened as I was writing more and more is I was talking to other people who were writing these online essays and building this personal branding like I was doing. And the feedback I kept on getting again and again was that so many professional editors, so many professional managers, they were used to working with journalists or academics and editing in those spheres. And so people were finding that their voices were getting stripped out of pieces. Stuff was getting like completely annihilated because it was supposed to be perfect kind of prose and grammatically correct. And that's not really what they wanted. It's not something that really does great in much of online writing, to be honest. I was editing for friends and trying to help out more because I had written for all of these major publications and everything else. I knew the journalistic side, but I also got the creative writing and marketing that people were trying to do. So I started editing for major brands. I've served as the managing editor for websites like Tropical MBA, Simple Programmer, Image Search. I was the community manager for Tropical MBA's Dynamite Circle. I've done editing on just a content basis for a ton of other brands, Eventbrite, like Bobsled Marketing. And I also have worked on coaching a lot of best-selling authors, one of which I know is in Compound and very generously dropped our name in his presentation to you guys a little bit ago, but Taylor Pearson and his phenomenal book, End of Jobs, is absolutely one of my favorite projects that we've ever worked on because it was a good book. I am an editor who loves helping people write things they can be proud of. So I've also created courses, communities for all those people, been on podcasts and all that stuff. The general gist of everything that we all know as an online writer. So I have a question, and if people can like wave or thumbs up or whatever, have you ever worked with a bad editor before? I can see some of you pop to the side. We definitely all have worked with a bad editor. I personally think Baby Yoda, as much as he could be the bad guy, like he never will be, but that's the way it goes with editors a lot of the time, is they set out with the best of intentions, They look super cute and adorable when they're trying to get your piece, and then things go off the rails as soon as they get into it. Again, baby Yoda is adorable and would never do anything wrong, but bad editors are out there. It's part of why I created Craft Your Content. So what I want to talk to you about in today's talk is this kind of editorial mindset, the editor's creed. Talking to Stu, he explained that this is a lot of what you guys do in compound writing, is editing each other, giving each other feedback, being that sharpened sword that's going to help improve each other's writing. And so I wanted to start with this quote by a gentleman that a lot of people have never heard of. And that's because the best editors don't necessarily, they're not the ones who are known. So this guy's name's Max Perkins. This is from his autobiography. It's called Editor of Genius. It's from a talk that he gave in New York City. The important thing to know about Max Perkins was the editor of The Lost Generation. So F. Scott Fitzgerald, Perkins, Thomas Wolfe, Ernest Hemingway actually went to F. Scott Fitzgerald and asked him to get him in with Max Perkins to work on editing and publishing his books. That's how brilliant this guy was. And the thing that he said to this group when he was asked about how to be an editor is, the first thing you must remember, an editor does not add to a book. At best, he serves as a handmaiden to an author. Don't ever get to feeling important about yourself, because an editor at most releases energy. He creates nothing. And I've loved that quote since I first heard it. That's why I ended up creating the editor's creed for the team that works with me at Craft Your Content, because I always want to make sure that the editing that we're doing for clients, and it sounds like the editing that you guys all want to do for each other, is always creating the best type of content and always creating the best that you can do. But you're not necessarily going in and writing something. You're not the one who's creating a piece. You're not creating feedback. You're releasing the energy that already exists in the piece. And that's a really important kind of editorial mindset to swap from. It's hard when you are a writer primarily, and I say that as someone who is a writer primarily, to swap that mindset from, I am not the one who is creating here. I am the one who is simply releasing this energy. That kind of term as a handmaiden. I know in today's times, handmaiden's a little bit scary with the television show and various other things. But at one point in time, it was simply someone who helped things along on their way. They helped their ladies in waiting. It was important for them to be there. And that's what we should do as editors. Super quick, if no one has ever read Editor of Genius, highly recommend it. It's a long book. Carve out like 3 months and chip away at it, but it's such a good piece. It will really help you with a lot of this editorial mindset as you're working to edit each other's work more. So what I did was created this editor's creed, and I'm just going to go through it quickly with you guys and explain a little bit about what each line means. So the first line, the editor's creed, I believe that my writers hire me to make their great writing even better. So that's the first thing that's important for an editor to remember, is someone who is coming to you. I believe Stu has shared my article before with you guys. You send stuff to an editor when you've thought yourself stupid, when you have nothing else to send and you think that this is the best that your writing can be, when you send it to an editor to get even better. And for us as editors at Craft Your Content, and for you guys as editors in Compound, you should really always know that someone is sending you what they think is the best version of themselves, and you're helping to make it better. Sometimes that feedback means telling them that like this might not be the best version of themselves. They definitely have some schmutz on their shirts that they need to like clean up before they go out in public. But in general, you are making something better. You are not fixing anything. You are taking something great and making it even better. Second thing, I believe that the voice and vision of the writer is the most important element in any work that I am editing. Voice and vision is really important in my agency. We have every single client that comes on board with us do what I call a voice and vision questionnaire, and then we create a profile off of it. It's essentially, what do you want to say and how do you want to say it? And so that's the thing that gets stripped out most regularly in editing cycles is people will try to make the writing the way that they think it should be perfect grammar, or it should be follow this particular type of format, or it should do this, it should do that. And that's not always honoring what the voice and vision of the writer is. So you can challenge those things as an editor, but you never want to tell someone to take themselves out of a piece. Instead, you want to figure out how to make the piece work with them in it. The third, I will always act as a professionally trained outside perspective rather than a grammar tyrant who strips imperfect originality in favor of perfect prose. That one is linguistically challenging for a very specific reason. And that is, we never want to come in as editors and try to dress up language or dress down language or try to do something that we think is grammatically how something should be done. Stripping that kind of imperfect originality, which is we learned in school, we learned in an AP style guide, whatever it is, says that's not how it's supposed to be. We don't want to ever strip that out of stuff because this is how it's supposed to be. Instead, it's you are an outside perspective that's coming in to help. I believe that educating a writer on their habits and areas for improvement is imperative to their growth. So that is, if you, especially in compound, find that you're like editing a friend's work a lot. Maybe you guys create like a partnership. Maybe you have a smaller group mastermind, things like that. It's as important to edit each piece as it is to start editing, providing feedback on habits and areas for improvement. If you see that someone, I am an ellipses whore, I put them in all of my writing. The Craft Your Content Style Guide literally has a bullet point to rein in Elisa's ellipses use because we know that it is a problem when I'm left to my own devices. It just looks like hundreds and hundreds of little dots all throughout my piece. Maybe not that bad, but it can get bad. So I had one of our editors once come back to me on a piece and say, hey, I've noticed in a lot of your pieces, you use ellipses a lot. Is that intentional or do you not realize you're doing it? And I had to honestly say, yep, nope, that is completely unintentional, had no idea, created the style guide. So you need to point that out to other people because it's impossible for writers to see our own blind spots. If it's a writing habit, a writing crutch, an area that you just aren't familiar with, sometimes you need someone else to point that out to you so that you know that you can improve on it. Otherwise, you're never going to grow as a writer. You'll always just keep doing the same thing. I will offer constructive criticism and always provide explanations whenever I make changes or corrections beyond the general errors and typos. So that one's really important in Craft Your Content. Proofreading, copy editing, if something is grammatically incorrect, if there's a typo, if there's something that's just flat out wrong, we just track the change. We don't explain to you like why that should be, a comma, or why the period should be inside a punctuation mark or something like that. That's just the way it is, unless we've heard otherwise from a style guide. But if you're making any changes beyond something that is just a very simple kind of correction, we will oftentimes track the change in the document and then immediately make a comment underneath it explaining why we're making that change so that the writers, the clients that we work with, again, they're learning, but they also understand where we're coming from, why we were confused, what we didn't understand. Because sometimes the changes that an editor is going to make aren't necessary. I know that this is hard to believe, and I'm very sad to announce it, but editors aren't perfect. They do occasionally not understand what a writer is trying to do. But if they just make the change and don't explain what their mindset is for it, the writer doesn't have any place to then come back and have a constructive conversation about what went wrong and how they can fix it. Instead, it turns into this whole thing where the writer feels slighted because something was changed. They don't know why, they don't know what they did wrong, and they just disagree with everything rather than having that constructively critical conversation that's going to make the piece better and eventually make the writer better as well. I believe that a writer's work is an exceptional example of their thoughts, and they have delivered me their best draft. That kind of goes back to the beginning, but it's so important. Like, we really want to reiterate it. This is when someone gives you a piece of their writing, even in a group like Compound, where you guys are sharing writing consistently, it takes a lot to write something, to put yourself into something, and then to put that out there. So you really have to consider that with the gravity that situation is. It's really a privilege to be an editor and to be asked to give feedback on a piece of writing that's being given. It's a really big trust exercise, and it's a real honor to be able to be a part of that process. So every time that you open someone else's Google document, I just really encourage you to remember that this is like the best example of someone's thoughts, and they're giving you their best draft, and go into that editing with that mindset and knowing your responsibilities there. I will provide feedback on what can be improved if I feel they can create a better draft. And that really is, we don't want to, it's really hard as an editor, especially as a writer coming in as an editor, to fall on one of two sides of the spectrum. You either go really heavy on the edits because you think that you need to drill down, and that's what an editor is supposed to do, or that's what group feedback is supposed to be, is picking apart everything to make it better. Or you'll lay on the other side of the spectrum, which is you'll go really soft and easy because you're nervous. You don't know how to give feedback. You don't know what you're supposed to say and do. And so you don't really want to challenge anyone, maybe even because you're nervous about being challenged yourself as a writer. And so you project that onto the piece that's you're editing. But the truth is, if you just provide feedback on what you think can be improved to create a better draft, and that create a better draft is the most important piece of this part of the creed, is really your mindset has to be that everyone is working on creating the best piece of work possible, the best piece of writing that can be done on this particular person's thoughts, ideas, experiences, etc. So if you provide feedback on what can be improved, you're all working together to make that better draft. I will not replace their words with my own. As a writer, this is my hardest struggle. When I see something that's written in a difficult way, my inclination is to jump in and rewrite it in the way that it would be fixed. But then those are my words that I've now jumped in and given to someone else. I've taken their voice out and put my voice in. And as we learned earlier in the creed, that's not what you want to do. You never want to strip out someone else's voice and vision. I will frequently offer in those comments suggestions of, I'm not really sure what you're trying to say here. Maybe try something like this, to relay what my confusion is and how I would rewrite it. And then I leave it to the writer who I'm editing. They can either, if I've written that, like, you are free to take that and put it into your draft. I do not need credit. I do not need anything. I have offered you my words freely. Or if you read those words and you think that's not really a good fit, but I do get what she's saying, it gives you a jumping off point to figure out how you might revise and rewrite your section into your own words. I believe that every piece of work of writing, that each piece of writing deserves my complete attention while I am working on it. So for me, when I am editing a piece, I have an editing playlist that is completely instrumental. I put in my noise canceling headphones. I make sure that I am sitting at a table with no distractions. I've gone to the bathroom. I have a glass of water. I have no reason to step away from that piece of writing unless I make the decision to step away because I need space away from the piece. And so that's really important for you guys as well. You don't want to be editing someone else's writing in Compound while you're like watching the newest episode of The Great British Bake Off. Because you're not giving someone your complete attention. And so that's not fair. It's one of those golden rule things. Like, you wouldn't want someone to do that while they were editing your piece of writing. So don't do it to them. Make sure that you are giving each piece of writing that someone gives you your complete attention. Again, going back, because it's a real honor to be asked to give that feedback in the first place. I will eliminate other sources of distraction and promise never to cut corners or haphazardly edit a writer's work. That is what ends up happening when you are distracted, when you aren't giving something your full attention, is you cut corners, you figure out the different ways. You're not going to do a grammar check because you're just going to tell them to put it through Grammarly. You're not going to fix this particular piece, or maybe your only feedback is just going to be like, I don't get this section, instead of jumping in and doing the hard work of providing the feedback. If you don't like that section, why? What didn't you like? What aren't you seeing? What different things and perspectives do you feel like need to be added to make that section complete? Don't cut the corner just because you are distracted or because you're like bored and done editing a piece. And that's the times that I'm talking about, that get up, walk away, go take a walk, come back later in the day, message the writer. I cannot explain this enough. We frequently have to tell writers, please don't start editing, doing revisions on your piece until I've signed off, because I can't tell you the number of times I've gone back into a draft and half of my suggestions are done. And I was like, I was going to actually add more to that, but I guess not. But yeah, make sure that you are eliminating that and that you're not cutting corners and you're not trying to like haphazardly edit someone. I believe that the writer has the final say when it comes to their words. This one is really a tough pill to swallow when you're providing your feedback, because the same way that a writer is putting themselves in there and giving themselves out, when you give feedback, you now have the same personal investment and interest. So it can feel like a really personal attack sometimes when a writer comes back and says, I get what you're saying, but I don't agree with it, and I'm not going to make those changes. And it really is a constant exercise in ego to be an editor and to realize that it's the writer's piece. Again, you are just there to create, to release energy. You aren't there to create things. You aren't adding your ideas so that it's now your piece. It's theirs. So if they don't agree with something, they have the final say. And then it's between them and their deity of choice what happens when that piece gets published. But it's really important to put aside your ego rather than getting into a comment brawl in Google Docs about feedback that you've given. I will challenge their ideas in writing to help them develop more valuable content. That one's, again, really important. You need to make sure that you're staying in the middle of that spectrum, not going too hard, but you need to challenge their ideas in writing. If there's things that you don't understand, if there's places that you don't understand, the jump that people have made in the flow of their writing, if you think they're flat out wrong, I have editors tell me all the time, like, where did you get this fact and why are you including it? And then I have to go back into my research and be like, I don't know, where did I get that fact? But you want to make sure that you are always challenging their ideas in writing. You do want them to create that more valuable content. You don't want to just let them slide. Challenge them constructively, but challenge them. I'll never do this, however, by belittling or demeaning a writer or their work. So while we do want to challenge their ideas, the incorrect response to challenging someone's idea is something to the effect of like, why are you even saying this? Or I don't agree with you, or any of those kind of belittling, demeaning. It's not your piece. You don't get to come crashing in on a piece and again, have one of those comment battles in a Google Doc. So as an editor, you need to figure out how to toe that, line between giving that constructive feedback and doing it in a way that isn't demeaning someone, that isn't making a writer feel like their writing isn't worth it or that they're doing something wrong. We'll frequently, when we're editing pieces, It's a rule of thumb and a gut instinct for our editorial team. But if you feel like you're getting too far down into the criticisms, like everything is just, you need to fix this, you need to fix this, the structure's not going this way, we'll actually go back up to the beginning of the piece and go through again and try to find places that we can point out things that we really liked. The way that they wrote a sentence, an idea that they had that made us think about it in a way that we hadn't before. So that if a piece does need to be really dug into and challenged, there's also some positivity in it so that the writer doesn't feel belittled or demeaned. And so that they don't walk away from an editing session thinking like, oh God, what kind of decision have I made with my life? And I can never be a writer again, because that's really not the point of an editor. I believe in the power of words to share stories, build messaging, expand platforms, convert customers, and even change lives. I think that's why you guys are all in Compound. I don't know that there's a lot of explanation on that one. Writers and editors both believe it, and we both have this same goal, that the power of words is impactful. And you need to approach writing with that belief that what is being written and what is being done really can enact change, either on something as simple as sharing a story or converting customers, right up to expanding platforms and changing lives, whether for the writer or for the people who are reading their writing. And then the last piece is I will review each piece of work I am assigned by employing this love of language. And so that is how we always end it, how every single editor goes back in, is remembering that we love words, we love language. We are constantly striving to help people make their own words even better. And so that's why we do what we do. And that's the most important, another important piece of that editorial mindset, is coming in with this love of language. So with that, that's the end of the editor's creed. So I think I'm going to pop it back to Stu for just a moment so he can go over what's going to happen next.
Yes, this was so good. I'm just mortified looking back at all the edits and feedback that I've given, having not fully internalized this creed. So I have an entirely renewed perspective on how to be a great partner, editor, someone who can really help bring a writer's intention to the forefront. We did have one clarifying question, or maybe just something that we'd love for you to expand on. We'd love to hear your thoughts about partial editing. So if a piece is really long and maybe you don't have 3 hours to dive deep on it, how do you think about that? Do you commit to editing the first portion of it, just skimming it? How do you think about a situation in Compound where maybe you just don't quite have the time to go deep on a very long piece?
Yeah, it's one of those, I'll have to get clarification from you, Stu, on whether are people like required to give feedback on certain pieces?
It's generally an honor code where you try to give as much as you receive.
Gotcha.
So if you ask for feedback on a long piece, you'll make sure to give feedback on one.
I think it's one of those, going back to the haphazard editing, the distractions, the everything else. For me, if I can't give a piece the attention that it deserves, then I'm doing a disservice to the writer by just half-assing my editorial efforts. I think if you are consistently finding that you don't have time to edit someone's longer pieces of writing, then it would probably be, that's like a conversation you need to have like in a meditation. But if it's happening occasionally and you just don't have time to edit like tons of full long edits, long pieces, hopefully there are other people in the group who do have the time on that particular edit, that piece. And then knowing that you're going to be the one who does have the time on the next one that comes in, where someone else has to focus on what they have to do. If someone's really struggling, no one's giving edits, no one's doing that, I would send them a private message to just, because you don't want to release the floodgates of everyone being like, oh yeah, I can read 4 sentences and give feedback. So send them a private message and say, hey, I saw that you haven't gotten a ton of traction on the piece that you shared on Tuesday. I don't have a ton of time, but I can give it a quick skim. Would you be interested? So that way you're honoring what they need and giving them the best pieces of yourself without coming into it distracted or coming into it in a way that's going to encourage everyone else to work on it distracted.
Yeah, I love that. So kind of default to editing stuff that you really feel like you can give your all. But if maybe something doesn't get the level of input that they might have, asking that permission from the writer to say, hey, I may not be able to give this the full in-depth review that I want to, but would it be valuable if I shared some gut reaction?
Exactly. Like I have a lot of friends who will ask me if I can read something of theirs. And I always have to ask them, are you asking me to read it as an editor, or are you asking me to read it as a friend who's just giving you feedback? Because if it's just a friend giving you feedback, I can put aside 10 minutes to read it and write you 4 sentences. If you think that you're going to be getting any sort of dig deep editorial, what Elisa does, I don't have the capacity to do that. Or if we're not close enough friends, I have a PayPal link here that you can.
Right. Yeah. Same freight. Well, amazing. I know I take responsibility as our timekeeper here for starting us late, but Alex, who's on the call, has just courageously volunteered a draft that Elisa, I think you will maybe, if I'll repost the link just so everyone else in the group has it, but the plan here is with just under 20 minutes on the clock, we are going to get to watch a pro in her element get started on this draft. And Elisa will, I think if it's best for you, you can tell me, share your screen maybe and show us how you work through maybe the first little bit of this, what I think will be a newsletter post. And then we will each get maybe 10 minutes, call it whatever the remainder is, maybe just under, to do some editing of our own. But we're going to have Elisa go through this piece and just set the direction of how she would approach a piece like this. We will each open up the doc and maybe start to add our own comments. And maybe with, call it 5 minutes on the clock at the end, we'll quickly regroup and share the experience. Now we get to put all this amazing theory into practice, and I'll hand the mic back to you.
Yeah. So first of all, hi, Alex. Thank you very much for volunteering this piece. Let me jump back into it again.
Yeah, it's in the chat for anybody who's on the call. You can.
I can see some anonymous shrew and anonymous chinchilla have joined the Google Doc. Thanks, Google, for your brilliant names and whatnot. Yeah. This is something I was pointing out to Stu before we jumped on this call, actually. This is something that the beginning of this is really important, I would say, for you as writers to be doing for each other when you're asking for feedback. So this isn't necessarily editing, but I was really impressed by it, Alex, that you're giving people the TLDR, too long didn't read, for anyone who's not hip on the internet's lingo, like I obviously am because I said hip on the internet's lingo. So this kind of breaking it down into other titles that I'm considering, what I'm trying to do with this piece, and feedback. What is the best feedback that someone's going to be able to give you on a piece? This is super important for getting that targeted feedback back to you on how you want things to be done. This is where you can point out things that maybe you're not too sure about, pieces of tone, various sections. This is actually something that we do frequently with Taylor when we edit his essays. He'll send us a Google Doc, and then we manage all of our client projects in Trello, and he'll put into the Trello card in notes pretty much exactly what you've created here, Alex, what he's intending to do with the piece, and any specific pieces of feedback or any specific things he really wants us to pay attention to when we're editing it. So kudos on that. And for anyone else who's watching this now or in the future, I would start trying to include a template like this at the beginning for anything that you're putting out for edits. Alex, I'm going to ask.
Sorry to interrupt there. Are there any like specific categories or fields, if you will, that you found most valuable for folks to think through, like intention or areas of feedback that I'd like?
I think what Alex has here with this is what I'm trying to do with the post, and this is what I'd help with, are probably the two most important that I would consider when you're putting that out there. Again, voice and vision. It's a silly catchphrase, but it's something that's really important to us at CYC because it is exactly what you're saying and how you want to say it. So basically, you want to make sure that you are requesting feedback that's going to help people understand what you're saying and how you want to say it. So things like tone, things like audience, media, like if this is going to be a newsletter or if it's going to be a blog post, is it a blog post that you're pitching to some huge, or you're trying to pitch it to Forbes or Inc. or Search Engine Journal or wherever your niche may be? Or is it something that you're going to put on your Medium, which is still an important writing tool, but obviously probably not as, intentionally worked as something you're trying to pitch to a larger publication? So Alex, I'm going to ask you questions. If you can just like thumbs up, thumbs down, or unmute yourself, whatever works for you.
Yeah, no problem.
So this is an email that you are sending out, correct?
Yeah, it's like the first part of my newsletter. I usually write a story or a lesson that I learned during the week, and this is one of them.
Gotcha. And what is your audience in 3 sentences?
I don't know.
Good sentences.
I would say mostly around productivity and self-improvement, I guess, if I had to choose something.
Gotcha. So so I can see the intention is to let readers know how to provide value, stand out from the crowd, and how to leverage a unique circumstance. Do you find a lot of your people are looking for content on like social media and influencing and that sort of thing?
Not necessarily. Again, I think that's a hard question for me just because I only recently started thinking about that, and I'm just starting to write it more broadly. So I don't really know who my target audience is. I'm just trying to write about things that I'm interested in. And if the audience likes it, then it's good. But if not, then I guess it's more for me for now. So that's why I care a bit less about the audience.
Gotcha. So my question for that would be, if you are writing for you, not the audience, why is this going out in newsletters to people's inboxes rather than getting blogged?
I guess my answer is why not? I mean, like the thing is, I guess it's, yes, I am trying to grow an audience. I just don't know what specific audience I'm targeting right now.
Gotcha.
So I hope to, yes, provide value. And that's why my intention is to provide value with my piece. It's just that, yeah, I guess these are not questions that I know the answer of right now. I ask these questions because a lot of people don't consider these things when they start out writing and getting into new pieces. It honestly is something that I do frequently with clients, is have at least 1 or 2 of these painful conversations where I'm just constantly asking, like, why? Can you explain more about that? I'm a huge believer in the Socratic method, which Socrates very rarely lectured in Athens. He instead was known for sitting on a rock, and as people told him things, he would ask them to just tell him more about it, to tell them about their experiences. The Socratic method, his question was frequently, please tell me more, please explain that. It's where we get, tell me like I'm a 5-year-old from, because you learn as much about someone else asking them questions as you would just like fixing things for them. So based on that, I'm going to just jump in here quickly. Is your audience, Alex, primarily, I know you're still building your audience, but would you say it's primarily US based or international? Yeah, it's probably more US based.
So
yeah,
the first
dollar sign in front.
Yeah.
I'm Canadian, that's why. So
yeah, so that will be something. This is something I'm beginning to encourage my writers more and more, especially in email subject lines. How and how to is starting to get really overused in titles and subject lines and things like that. So it doesn't have the same impact that it used to. Basically, it's an implication thing. If you send me an email that says, I convinced a popular YouTuber to give me $749, I assume that when I open that email, you are going to explain how you did that. You could rickroll me. I would be I'm not going to lie, I'll give you props if you did. But the kind of implication there is there's a how inferred. So I tell people more and more to try to take out those who's. This is a great opening line. 2 weeks ago, I made a $749 mistake. That's enough of a figure of money that a lot of people would be like, whoa, that sounds bad. I want to learn more. We appreciate car wrecks and rubbernecking to see what happens. So anything that kind of creates a little bit of intrigue like that is a fantastic lead line. So instead of browsing Twitter as I normally do, P.S., I would be reading this out loud in my brain, which is why you're all listening to me read it out loud in this thing. I decided to work on my weekly newsletter and missed Ali Abdal's announcement that the prices for his course. So I am a habitual offender of asides as well. I do a lot of these. The problem is you're like cutting up your flow a little bit here with all of these asides. So I would choose which of these is more important to your voice and what you want to do. Either cut the parentheses of as I normally do, or a popular productivity YouTuber. I would say as I normally do, because you probably want to explain to your audience who Ali Abdal is. But so if we cut that out, it now reads much quicker. Instead of browsing Twitter, I decided to work on my weekly newsletter and missed Ali Abdal, PS, a popular productivity YouTuber's announcement that prices for his course. Is part-time YouTuber the name of his course?
Yeah, like I feel that I repeat YouTuber twice, so maybe I can remove it because it's not that useful to the sentence.
Yeah. And I think right here, especially, we're talking more about what you were doing and about the situation of what you noticed. You're describing the experience. So putting in too much information cuts the flow and overwhelms the person. So I would agree 100% with that, to cut out that part-time YouTuber and then cut out that as well. This is just, by the time I saw it, it was already too late. Again, this opening is just fantastic for an email. I want to scroll and find out, how does this relate to $749 mistake? I'm guessing it's about this, but I know he got it back. Please tell me more. So instead, I reluctantly purchased the essential membership, the same price I would have gotten the premium membership had I seen the announcement a few hours earlier. I took the chance by tweeting at him, but obviously didn't get any response. I'm assuming he has a large following. Gotcha. Apart from a few likes from supportive tweeter friends. I like that, especially with the thanks. Silly grammar note. You don't need a period if you have punctuation inside of a parentheses. I was pretty bummed out at the beginning, but almost got mad for a bit. I thought Ali would be a cool guy and just responded to my... So this is something I am just going to point out. This is a trick for you for your own writing, but then also everyone just to know. So I'm on a Windows, so I'm doing Control F. I think you can do Command F if you're on Mac. So obviously, if you try to find the letter I, it's going to tell you there's a lot of them. But what you can do is do space I space. And that's going to tell you every time that you use the word I in a piece. So we can see you have 62 words that use 62 instances of using the word I. And then if we come up here to word count, I can see that you have 1,337 words. So 62 divided by 1,337. You have about 4.5% of your entire piece is the word I, which is something, to be honest, that isn't necessarily surprising, especially based on your prior comment that you're doing a lot of this writing for yourself and trying to figure out where you are and what you're doing. I can tell that by the fact that this is a very you-focused piece, wherein if the reader is going to continue reading through this, they're going to want to know about themselves as much as they know about you. So if we were to search you, there's about a third of instances of the word you, as opposed to the word I. That would be something, sorry for moving this around, I just need to move the Zoom pictures. So that would be something that I would throw in there and start considering, especially here. The reason I'm noting it is because you've basically got 1, 2, 3, essentially 4, because it's and when I, 5, I realized normally, 6, I realized, 7, so I, that's 7 paragraphs in a row that are starting out you focused. Rather than having those pieces, I took a chance at tweeting him. That's obviously going to be you focused because it's an action you took. You could say something here. To say that I was pretty bummed at the beginning and almost got mad for a bit would be an understatement. I And then you can almost pull this paragraph back up there with that then. I thought Ali would be a cool guy and respond to my tweet to bump me up. It wouldn't even take him any time. And cut this. I thought to myself, that's implied because we're assuming that if you're being bummed about something and then putting that in quotation marks, you're probably thinking it in your head. You may have been screaming it at the computer into the void, but probably it was just thought about. And then something here, you could do something to the effect of, how egotistical is it to think that Ali Abdaal, a productivity YouTuber, doesn't have anything better to do than respond to future students crying about how they didn't register for a course earlier? That change right there, it's still the exact same sentiment that you wanted to say in this paragraph, but it's making it less about you and the kind of hurt that you felt from not being replied to, which we already got in the prior paragraph. And instead making it more of a statement, something that you're challenging your readers to think about. How egotistical is it for any of us to think that someone like Ali Abdaal would have nothing better to do? So it pulls them in a little bit.
Is there a certain ratio that you would say, like, or percentage where you would reduce the number of eyes to, let's say, 2% of your piece?
Yeah, I usually try to keep it between 2 to 3%. So you're not like horribly up there with 4.6. I was telling Stu in another call, one of the worst manuscripts we've ever edited, I had to release back to the editor because in the first 10,000 words of an 80,000 word manuscript, 22% of the book was about them. And so I basically, it was, I don't think you've thought yourself stupid yet. This isn't a piece that's ready to be edited at this point. It's way too you focused rather than this other way. So it is 2 to 3%. Again, you're not hugely out of the way with that 4.6%, but it does start to show up beyond the percentage. Like I said, looking at these 7 paragraphs in a row that are all essentially centered on and starting with you as the subject, rather than trying to open it up so that the statement is more accessible to people. So on that, I'm now looking at the time and realizing it's 3:59, Stu. So I don't know what you want to do the first few paragraphs.
No, totally. This is actually so helpful that I wanted to let you run over. So we need to watch a pro. I think this is actually incredibly valuable. So actually, because we're at time, and I think that is just fantastic to actually see how you really work through these. What I'm going to do is I will end us on time. So we will just stick to some of the expertise you've already shared during this call and then some of this guidance here. Alex, remind me, have you actually shared this in Compound already?
No, not yet.
Cool. So I think what we'll do is we'll just take this offline, and when you share it in Compound, if that's your intention, already haven't gotten some feedback here, we can maybe do editing as Compound members in the group just to keep us on track here. I think this is like an amazing way to prime us and get there. I did want to leave maybe a minute or two for folks who can run over to ask any clarifying questions for Elisa. And one that I was just going to slide in really quick is when you're making these eye edits, for example, obviously we're doing this live and you're able to share the context with us on the call. Would you typically be, like you said earlier, explaining what you're doing in a higher level concept of some of these edits as you do them?
Yeah, so that's here. I would probably do a quick comment over here.
Yep.
For anyone who's, I suppose I could say this out loud for anyone who wants the actual value. Well, whoa, there's a lot of I's starting the sentence. I get it. It's hard to not talk about yourself in a personal essay, but you want to give the reader space to see themselves in your story as well. Mm-hmm. And then because I made this change here, like I replaced, and I realized with how egotistical is it, this might help with the eyes, still keeps the sentiment of your paragraph, but doesn't focus it on you as the subject. So this is how I do a lot of the edits when I'm not talking through stuff directly to Alex on the screen, is if I'm making those changes making them in comments. And like we said before, if you make the change, explain why in a comment beneath it, why you are making that change so that he can see it. So he's not like, why are you taking away all my eyes? This is a personal essay. What are you doing to me? He understands where I'm coming from and why I'm making that suggestion. And so it's a little bit easier. It also, as an editor, is a way to make sure that your opinion is heard, really, as someone giving feedback. If you just make the changes and don't explain it, then a writer is going to be defensive, as you would be if you were the writer. And so then it's just not a constructive engagement for either party.
Totally. I was curious too, when you're offering some ways to rephrase a section, or like you said earlier, you don't want to put words in the writer's mouth, but you do have the option, obviously, to maybe suggest some alternative phrasing and be constructive. And this is a bit of a tactical question, but do you typically do that as like an inline suggestion in a doc, or do you punt it over to a comment where maybe you have a sentence that's rewritten with one possible approach they could take?
I would say probably about 80 to 90% of the time, I'll punt it over to a comment. If it's something that's going to be really complicated to explain in a comment, but I can easily track changes in a paragraph to show how I would shift things around, then I'll do the tracked changes and highlight the whole paragraph and explain what I did with those tracked changes. But in general, I try not to write over someone else's writing unless it is something that's like this section here. I did rewrite some of Alex's stuff by saying how egotistical it is to think rather than, and when I realized how egotistical, but it's a tracked change and it's also very simple and maintains the majority of his own words. It just shifts the style a little bit.
Love it. Yeah, super helpful, because I think that's something there's always this balance of not wanting to be too prescriptive. Amazing. I know
I'm so sorry. I could talk about editing for hours. I'm so sorry, everyone.
No, we should have booked a couple hours in hindsight. I know we're over, but if anyone has maybe a couple more questions, feel free to ask them now. And then alternatively, Elisa, what's the best place for folks to find you online, to reach out, to work with you? Where should folks maybe follow up after the call if there are follow-ups?
Yeah, the best place to find me is Craft Your Content, craftyourcontent.com. I say that because my name is super complicated to spell. I know you can see it right now in the Zoom chat, but the Craft Your Content's easiest to find me. Please understand, it is my cobbler's kids situation. So my website has like none of the information of what you actually need to get in touch. So just make sure to get in touch with me personally if you have questions. And that's Elisa, ELISA @craftyourcontent.com. And then honestly, if you want to just follow me in general, Twitter is probably like, I similar to Alex, spend way too much time on Twitter when I should be doing other things. So I feel you, Alex.
Yeah, that makes three of us. And does anybody have any other clarifying questions for Elisa right now? Because I'm going to share the recording of the whole creed, which I think is just amazing. I'm going to shamelessly promote that, share with our group, replace a lot of our editing guidelines with some of the creed. But feel free to chime in now if you have any other wrap-up questions.
I do, for sure, if that's cool.
Yeah.
Please do.
When you did the Command F for I, that was such a simple thing that in hindsight was obvious. Oh, duh. Instead of thinking like, it seems like you use I a lot, you just counted it. Are there any other things that maybe you picked up that are non-obvious, or 5 years into editing you learned that you wish you would have known at the beginning?
One is another find trick for anyone who still is painfully using double spaces. You can find double space and replace with space, and it will replace all of the double spacing in a document. Not great if you're working with programmers, lots of double spacing in code blocks, but I work with a lot of programmers. We learned that one the hard way. In general, The find I and find my, I just recently figured out, I'd say probably within the last year. So like I've been editing other people's work since about 2011, and in 2019 or so, I figured that out. Overnight success, everyone. I'll try to think if there are other ones that I know and pass them along to Stu if there's any easy, quick editing tips and tricks. A lot of them really are just me trying to see if something can work. One day I realized this person's using a lot of I's. I wonder how many I's they're using. How can I find how many I's they're using? And just using the tools that I knew I could. Honestly, like Google Docs is one of the most phenomenal editing softwares that's out there. So if you can try, it's probably out there, or it's Googleable.
Sweet. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't have like more awesome tricks.
That's okay. And then I had one other question related to when you were talking about Perkins, and like often the best coaches aren't good players. Are there any crossovers or similarities between writing and editing, or things that like, hey, as an editor, if I really practice this, it'll really help my writing, and maybe practicing something else won't help it as much?
As an editor, I personally don't find that a lot of writers are well equipped to be proofreaders. The way that a writer's mind works, it's too hard to try to stop consistently at every character and space to make sure that it's being done correctly. So if I don't have a proofreader that I'm working with on something, like I'll use Hemingway and the free version of Grammarly to try to pick up as many lower lying proofreading errors, just because it is really difficult for a writer to proofread. Another thing I'm a massive proponent of, we have a course that's closed right now, but it will be reopening probably at the beginning of 2021, of copy work. And so copy work is actually how we all used to learn writing before someone decided. So you can tell from like, I edited Taylor's End of Jaws for anyone who's read it. There's an entire rant about the destruction of the educational system and how it really just became an institution rather than actually teaching us anything worthwhile. Copy work is how we used to learn writing. What it is, you literally just take pieces of writing that you really admire and you sit down and you copy them by hand. It sounds extremely simple and dumb. It is honestly one of the best ways that I have ever found people to read others' writing and learn from it, because it does two things. It slows you down because you have to be handwriting everything that you're reading. So it makes you comprehend more. And secondly, from a neuroscience standpoint, you're actually engaging two different parts of your brain. You're engaging the part that's reading and comprehending things, and you're engaging the part of your brain that's actually doing a physical activity. And when you're able to kind of fire, this is still neuroscience, but not how they would neuroscientifically explain it. Basically, when you're firing more neurons in your brain, when you're activating more areas of your brain, it actually activates even more areas around that. So that's when you start learning things. That's when you start building habits. It's one of those, I joke all the time. It's in the copy work course that we have, Become a Master Writer. I say it's the Miyagi method. So for anyone who's ever watched The Karate Kid, you're basically doing the copy work and hating my very existence for asking you to do the copy work and wondering why you ever paid money to sign up for the course. You're waxing on, you're waxing off, you're painting the fence. You don't understand what you're learning until you actually get into the dojo, and then like you just muscle memory realize that you've picked up and learned so much from reading someone else's writing. So it's not necessarily editing work, but it's probably one of the most effective exercises I've ever found for people to learn from other writers without having to exert a ton of effort. You can do copy work. You can do copy work while you're sitting there watching the latest episode of The Great British Bake Off.
Sweet. Thank you.
Amazing. It's so funny. I've heard of copy work. I've heard actually copywriters. I've heard a few folks that I follow give this exact advice. Go pull the best ads you've ever seen, get out a pen and paper and literally copy in their case, copywriting, the ad copy itself, and do it over and over ad nauseum. And you'll just notice you're building these muscles. So That is amazing. I definitely ignored it at first, but now that I'm hearing it a second time, I'll hopefully take it to heart. Well, Elisa, I can't thank you enough for making the time to share all of this hard-won wisdom with us. And I hope at some point we'll have to do a round two, because this is just such a rabbit hole that I want all of us to dive deeper into. And thanks again for making the time. I am going to send this recording out to obviously everyone who joined for the call, but also to the broader community, because I think this is just so invaluable to anybody doing any sort of editing work. So Alyssa, I just can't thank you enough for making the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It was, like I said, I can talk about editing and writing for hours. So anytime anyone gives me an opportunity to do that, I'm in.
Amazing. And I just want to do a shameless plug to subscribe to the Craft Your Content newsletter. I'm a happy reader. This is like one of a handful of things I actually open and just totally get sucked into each week. So I'll share the link in Slack. But thanks again for making the time, and hope to do it again sometime soon.
Yeah,
Yes,
definitely.
Thanks so much.
I was going to say, and thank you, Alex, for coming like under the firing squad. Truly, not even group edited, but getting edited out loud in front of everyone.
No, but it was really helpful for me. So thank you for taking the time.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all very much. Like Stu said, come find me at Craft Your Content. Let me know you're from Compound. I may have some goodies for you.
Whoop, whoop. Awesome. Well, I hope we do this again soon. And thanks everyone for joining.
Awesome. Take care.
Awesome. See y'all.